So let's generate our motivation. And as we discussed earlier today, when we don't watch our minds carefully, then we can have one false idea and then extrapolate on it, making it the reason to cultivate other false ideas and get ourselves very tangled up. So by learning the debate method, we can begin to look at how we construct arguments in our own mind, whether they're philosophical arguments or emotional arguments or interpersonal arguments. We can get an idea of how our mind thinks and constructs things. And that gives us a lot of power to stop the nonsensical reasonings when we notice them, instead of getting wrapped up in them and tangled up in them. So let's have a strong determination to do that and to help other people do it, and to have some fortitude and patience with other people who may not have this kind of mindfulness to be able to detect when their mind is making up all sorts of false arguments. So instead of getting tangled up in others' confused arguments, and instead of getting tangled up in our own, to be able to see them for what they are and just leave them aside, or have patience in the case of other people. And so with this, it will make it much easier to develop compassion and bodhicitta, and really generate the wish to become Buddhas, where we are free ourselves of all these confused reasonings and can help others really to be free of them as well, because these are the things that are the source of our dukkha. So when I say that confused reasonings are the source of our dukkha, it doesn't mean that we sit around and intellectually make false arguments, okay? But the whole, when we look at ignorance, ignorance is based on a false argument, not an intellectual one, but, it's basically things appear this way to me, therefore they must exist that way. Yeah? It appears that way to my senses, it must exist that way. And we never question that, so we never penetrate our ignorance, we just accept all the appearances as true. Yeah? And they're not true because things don't inherently exist. And in the same way, when we're all tangled up emotionally, it's because we're, having many kinds of thoughts and putting these thoughts together to make an argument, I'm hopeless because, da 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 da, we went through a lot of these kinds of things when we were beginning to make syllogisms to see how our mind, makes up false reasons and then gets pretty miserable and tangled up in them. And then these kind of false reasons, false arguments, are the basis for a lot of our emotions. My anger is justified because this person did X, Y, and Z to me. Okay, but if you look at the 3 criteria for a syllogism, that is not a syllogism. Yeah. The reason doesn't pertain to the subject, and there's no pervasion. So it's total kind of confusion in our mind. Yeah, but we say this a lot, don't we? Yeah. My anger is justified because they did this. And especially when you look at the pervasion, because they did this, if they do this, then I necessarily have to get angry, and my anger is justified. There's no other emotion I could possibly feel. And I should get angry because every reasonable person would be upset by this. And then, of course, if every reasonable person would be upset by this, then there's nothing wrong with my anger, and it's justified, and I can feel it, and I can spout it all over and wipe it all, vomit it all over other people, and spread it all over with a butter knife. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then we really think that, and then of course we're miserable. How are we ever going to get out of our misery if we think like that? What do you think? What do you think? Yeah? Are you ever going to be happy if you think like that? Okay, so if we can really look at how our mind is constructing reasons and arguments and syllogisms day to day, and that kind of mindfulness of being able to see that and understand why it's false, then that gives us a tremendous ability to press the stop button before we get so wacko. Yeah? Because otherwise, boy, we can rev ourselves up, can't we? Yeah, we're good at that. And it's misery making. So that's why, and he's encouraging us a lot in the book to just listen to how people talk in normal conversation. And it's not that people lay out syllogisms, consider, consider my boss. He is a jerk because, we don't lay it out like that. But just the way we think, you can see, and he's been encouraging us from the beginning to watch how people talk and how they think and how we ourselves talk and think. Yeah. And then see, the wrong thinking out there and in here. Yeah. So in the case of anger, I find it, before I even started, studying debate, just, or, formally like this, is just to, because the thing is so strong, they did this, therefore I have to be angry. And to keep on saying, why do I have to be angry? Which is essentially saying to myself, there's no pervasion. Just because somebody did this, why do I have to be angry? There's no pervasion that if somebody does that, I necessarily have to be angry. Yeah? But as long as I believe that, boy, then I'm going to sit and stew in it. You sit and stew. with some carrots and potatoes. Yeah, some green pepper, a little bit of basil, that nice basil. Yeah. So we're at the outline that says strategies and debate. Did we start that last week? We just stopped right before it. Okay. So normally we think of a strategy for debate as some sort of offensive or defensive move that will put you at an advantage. We do not normally think of avoiding the fight as a strategy. Wouldn't that be, imagine avoiding the fight as a strategy. Yeah, think of that in your own life. Okay, that a strategy for debate is to avoid the fight to start with. Okay. However, as mentioned in chapter 15, choosing your debate partner, the first advice for anyone interested in rational discourse is to choose well your opponents. There is no use wasting your time, and most people are not suitable opponents. Okay, so here, I mean, he's just talking in general. He's not saying most people trained in debate aren't suitable, but people in general. This is not meant to be cruel or disrespectful of others. We can all benefit by rational discourse, but most people are simply not prepared or not willing to participate in good faith. Basically, there's no reason to start down that road with somebody if you are not going to go anywhere. Okay, so it's kind of like, the thing of somebody asking you for advice and you give advice and they don't listen, the yes but people, then, why do you keep on trying to help them? Their minds are totally closed, So it's the same here. If somebody's not willing for rational discourse to question their beliefs, or in an emotional thing, if they're not really willing to relinquish their argument and reconcile, then you can talk until you're blue in the face and it doesn't do any good. Yeah. So I think it's, it's something to look out for. Here he's saying, if somebody's not interested in rational debate, don't waste your time. And I think, if somebody's asking you for advice or emotional help, but they're not really open to it, then again, don't waste your time. Yeah, there may be somebody else who is more suitable to help that person. Yeah, or maybe they just need to stew in it for a while until they decide they want to change. But sometimes we think, but I'm the only person to save them, so I've got to talk to them till I'm blue in the face. Yeah, because if I don't do that, I'm lacking compassion. And then you spend all your time talking and they don't budge. Their minds don't budge. Are you ever like that? Either side. We've done both sides, haven't we? We've done the, I've got to talk to them because I'm the only one who can help. And we've done the, I want help, please, I'm in so much pain. But no, I don't want to do that, and I don't want to do that. And that argument doesn't make sense. And don't ask me to look at this person in another way, because that way's wrong, my way's right. Yeah. Okay. He was saying, if you're not interested in rational discourse, don't waste your time. I can think of one situation. Yeah. If you give up on rational discourse because you realize that the person they aren't open to changing their mind, but you're curious about the way they think, and so you ask them questions and you draw out what they think, simply because you're curious to understand it, not because you want your speech to have an effect on them. Okay, so that could be the situation. Mary Grace, when she gave us the example of talking to the Trump supporter who was an Uber driver, that's a very good example of that. She had no idea or no wish to change his way of thinking, but she was very curious how somebody could think that way. Yeah, and I think in diversity training, if we have that kind of attitude too, like, gee, these people were brought up different, they see the world differently than I do. I'm just curious how they see it. I'm not trying to change them to my political view. I'm not trying to change how they think, but I'm just curious how sentient beings build up their belief system. Yeah. And so you listen and you have discourse for that reason. And in that way, you can connect with somebody because you're not trying to deal rationally. You're just curious and interested. Yeah. And then you can have a good relationship, kind of what you do when you go to visit your mother. You're not going to change her political views, but you watch the programs with her because it's interesting. How are these people thinking? Yeah. How do they come to their conclusions? How do they express themselves? Yeah. So, it's good to be aware of that. It really, I think, enlarges our mind so that we can understand other people better. So related to this decision, there is a Buddhist example of how people should be when listening to the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings. Okay, the example suggests that people are ready to hear the teachings when they are like a cup turned right side up with room to pour something in, clean and not leaky. Okay, so that's why at the beginning of Lam Rim, they talk about the 3 pots. One is upside down. Nothing goes in. The person doesn't remember. They're resistant. They don't want to hear. The next one, they're right side up, but there's a hole in the bottom. So anything you put in goes in one ear and out the other. And the next one is the pot is filthy. So anything you put in it becomes contaminated. The person doesn't understand it. They misunderstand it. They misuse it because they have a rotten motivation. Okay? So, they teach about the 3 pots so that we can look inside and ask ourselves, am I a receptive vehicle to hear the Dharma? Yeah. And so this is with all kind of discourse. When we ask people to help us, am I receptive to the help that they may give? Yeah. If I'm not really receptive, don't ask. Yeah. Yeah. So the yes but people who come, you've heard me rail about the yes but people. They come and some long story, and then you try and say something to help them. Yes, but no, that's not going to work. Yeah. And yeah. So it's easy to get frustrated with somebody who's a yes but person, who's not really receptive. But we've also got to look inside and see, am I a yes but person? Yeah. And am I, when I attend teachings, am I really receptive? Or do I go in and I'm in a bad mood that says, I really don't feel like sitting and listening to this debate stuff? Or, debate is so boring. or I'm too stupid to learn it, but I gotta go, so I'll sit there and try and stay awake, even though I'd rather be in bed. Yeah. So to just check before we come to class, what's going on in our mind? What's our motivation? Are we receptive? Huh? Okay. The example suggests that people are ready to hear the teachings when they are like a cup turned right side up, with room to pour something in, clean and not leaky. If you want to pour your tea into a cup, you need a cup like that, a proper vessel. Okay, this advice is given within the context of religious practice, but it is good advice for listening and paying attention to someone speaking on any topic. Yeah. So, to really see. So we must ask ourselves sometimes if we're more interested in feeling accepted and belonging, or more interested in getting at the truth. Because sometimes we may be with people who present all sorts of unreasonable arguments. Yeah. But we go along with them because we want to be accepted. We want them to accept us and to think well of us. Yeah. Are we a suitable vessel at that time? If we really are turning off our thinking caps and turning on our please like me, our please like me, whatever it is. Okay. Yeah. So to always kind of check. Because we often talk about peer pressure and, how we're adversely affected by bad friends. Yeah. But this depends too on, if we are not a suitable vessel, yeah, for bad views, then we're not going to adapt them. In other words, if we're really willing to think things through and question what people say to us and so on, yeah, then we won't be affected by peer pressure that goes in the wrong way. Yeah. But if we just want people to like us, then whatever they say we'll go along with, because, we don't really want to, for us at that moment, being accepted is more important than finding the truth. Yeah. So to really check on that. Yeah, because I always think of Geshe Sonomrichin saying, when we say, how do these non-Buddhist teachers, who will follow them? And he says, if they came here and taught you, you would believe them. Yeah. So, why would I believe them? Well, if they're charismatic and everybody in the group is following along and thinks what they're saying is fantastic, yeah, and my mind's lazy and I don't really want to think, then yeah, I'll go along with it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Where, and that's how we get influenced by what the Buddha called bad friends, who could be people who really, really like us, but they have a different worldview. And so the way, the advice they give, the way they, what they invite us to do, how they want us to think, is not very conducive for finding the truth. The example recommends that a person should be like a cup turned right side up. You can't pour tea into an upside down cup, and you cannot convince people if they are not receptive and will not or cannot listen. Yeah, you ever met people like that? I remember, where was I? I don't know, in some other country. And some born again person started conversing with me. And I joined in, initially. And then I realized, this is not going anywhere. Yeah. So I cut off the conversation. Yeah. I was once, when I lived in Singapore, one of the young men I was working with, he was dying of cancer. And somehow he had met some Christians before who were very evangelical and forceful and invited themselves over to his home. And so one day, I was there and they were there and we were both waiting to see him. And, and they're trying to convert me. And they were very skillful. They started out with, well, Buddhism is a religion for heathens. Yeah, excellent way to convert people. Yeah, good icebreaker. Yes, the opening volley. Yeah. Yeah, you are a heathen because you are a Buddhist. Okay. So, but for some people, and we see this illustrated now, you insult people, and by insulting them, then they begin to doubt themselves, and they want to be liked by the person insulting them, so they go along with it. Okay, this is what's happening with many of the Republicans right now. What? Heathen? Like a barbarian? Yeah. Yeah. We're barbarian because we don't believe what they believe. Yeah. So other people, if you insult them, they get offended and they're not going to listen to what you say, even if what you say happens to be reasonable. Other people, if you insult them, they so much want you to like them that they follow along. True or not true? Yeah. You done that in your life? Yeah. Gotten involved with people who are ridiculous because you want them to like you? Okay. So, so this is the whole thing about making ourselves into good, suitable vehicles. Yeah. And looking out for people who are suitable vehicles. Okay. This example of the cup also recommends that people should avoid the fault of being like a cup that is turned right side up, but does not have any room left to pour anything in. Yeah. Sometimes, out of commitment to a view, an opponent simply cannot take in what you are saying. If such an opponent is not participating in good faith, this is like the card carrier I referred to in chapter 15, Choosing Your Debate Partner. If a person is not committed to an open-minded way, don't waste your time. The example also recommends that a person should avoid the fault of being like a cup with filth in it. Okay, clearly you don't want to pour your tea in a cup with poop in it, and you can't pour your tea in a cup that's already full because the person is so attached to their own ideas they can't take anything in. This would be, so pouring your tea in a cup with poop in it. This would be like people who are so much under the influence of the mental poisons that they cannot listen. Like an opponent who is very angry, someone who is too prideful to listen, or someone who talks with you only because of desire, like a salesman pretending to care what your concerns are. Mm-hmm. Finally, the example of the cup recommends that a person should avoid the fault of being like a leaky cup. As applied to judging an opponent for debate, it is essentially the advice that a worthy opponent should have adequate memory to stay in the game.
Okay.
Can we write the debate down so I can look at it later? Because I can't remember one point after the next. I'm just trying to keep my head above water here. So, in trying to decide whether or not someone is suitable to debate with, watch to see if the person is suitable according to the guidelines of the cup. If not, you may be able to engage with them only in other ways, like talking about sports or shopping. Those are what I'm adding. Bear in mind that the example also applies to you, so it might be appropriate to stop yourself before you waste another person's time. Yeah, good advice. If it looks suitable to actually engage in debate with a person, what forms the framework for Buddhist reasoning and debate are the three purposes of debate as laid out in chapter 19. Again, these are 1, to reveal and defeat mistaken ideas, 2, to establish a correct position, and 3, to overcome objections to the position that has been established. So as I recall, there's a debate. One of your homework assignments before was to make up syllogisms proving this. So that will be taken up on one of the Thursdays when I'm gone. And somebody who leads the class will do that. So make your syllogisms about those 3 points. The first purpose of Buddhist reasoning, to reveal and defeat mistaken ideas, is more offensive than defensive. In this function, a debater is called upon to attack and reject others' positions by pointing out the problems and shortcomings in their thought. Okay, and so to always remember that the person is doing that because they care. Yeah, and because both of you together are trying to find out the truth and how things really exist. The second purpose of Buddhist reasoning, to establish a correct position, and the third, to overcome objections to the position that has been established, are more defensive in nature than offensive. You put something out there, and now you need to defend it. When you set forth a solid position, you have to outline a defensible understanding carefully and clearly. In other words, you can't just say, blah. You know, this is the truth. All cats are lovable. You can't just say that. Yeah, you have to have some reason. And you can't say all cats are lovable because my cats are lovable. Yeah, that's not a reasonable syllogism. Okay? So, you know, we have to be able to make a statement and then support it by reasons. If it looks I read that part. Mm-hmm. Okay, the second purpose of Buddhist reasoning, to establish a correct position. I read this already. And the third, to overcome objections to that position, has been established, that objections to the position that has been established are more defensive in nature than offensive. You put something out there, and now you need to defend it. When you set forth a solid position, you have to outline a defensible understanding carefully and clearly. So it's kind of like, you know, when we work together in our different teams, if you have an idea about, you know, how you want to put in the septic system or how you want to arrange how people set up for pujas, you have to have an idea and then you have to explain it afterwards, you know, because people may not understand the reason for your idea, or they may have other information that you don't know that would make, you change your idea, but that's not going to come out unless you try to explain what you're thinking. Mm-hmm. Together, the three purposes function to raise our consciousnesses. In sorting through the oceans of information in life, the first purpose is to consider carefully what you are hearing or reading, as well as what is coming out of your own mouth or rumbling around in your noggin, perhaps to discover faulty understandings or to see that a criticism is inappropriate. Okay, do you know the word noggin? It means your head. Yeah. Is that a slang term? Yeah. What?
It's been around for a while.
It's long been for, yeah. I remember hearing this as a kid. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So to check, what we're reading and hearing, and observe what we're saying too, or what is rumbling around in our own thought, to see if we are being a suitable vessel, or a suitable opponent for somebody else. Okay. It's kind of like, when we're upset about something, someone may try and talk to us about something, and we can't take it in. Psychologists call this a refractory period, when you're so emotionally, that anything anybody says to you, it's like, you just can't take it in. So, this happens to us too. Second, the reasoning process calls upon us to think about a problem and settle on a conclusion. Okay, that's what our job is. Think about it, settle on a conclusion. Yeah. So what we may think, the first time we may study something, we may not settle on a conclusion. We may just be trying to get the words and the concepts clear in our mind. Yeah. Then the next time you think, you study it, maybe you understand it more, but you still have doubts. And the next time you study it, maybe you get to a correct assumption, but it's not really firm and solid in your mind, and you can easily change your mind. So it requires, many times of learning something, many times of thinking about it. Yeah. So we have to really have some perseverance. If we just have the attitude of, well, I'll study it once, and if I don't get it, then forget it, then for sure we'll never learn it. Yeah. So if you put me in front of an engineering book, that's probably what I'll do. I'll look at it and I'll say, I don't get this. And actually, I'm not so interested in understanding it. If I were interested in understanding it, then I would probably continue, even though it was hard to understand. But when I'm not interested in understanding it, I say, forget it, not enough bandwidth. We'll hire someone else to figure out the engineering aspects of, for the Buddha Hall. Yeah, but I'm going to spend my time on something else. Okay, so sometimes we just aren't interested in something, and nobody can get through to us. Yeah, and part of it is maybe we genuinely aren't interested, and some of it is we're just plain old lazy. It's like, oh, I don't understand it the first time, and I don't really feel like going over it and trying to study it and understand it and remember the points. I'd much rather read a novel, kind of like me and engineering. I'd much rather do something else than learn engineering. But the thing is, if we do this regarding the Dharma, then we're limiting our own ability to learn the Dharma. And if we want to progress on the path to awakening, we have to learn the Dharma. So there may be some topics that are difficult, but we have to nudge ourselves to try and understand them and to go over the material again and again and again. The third tool of reasoning and debate is to refine and clarify, to defend and shore up your conclusion. With all of these together, you should have a more developed awareness and much greater clarity in regard to whatever you consider. So if you find a suitable opponent and decide to engage in debate, these three purposes form the framework for the undertaking, the overall strategies. Okay, so to remember, this is why you're debating, these three things. So once you are in a debate of any sort, whether within yourself or with a suitable opponent, okay, so we debate with ourselves sometimes too. In fact, it's very good before we debate with somebody else to think about the material ourselves and debate it with ourselves. And that will help us understand the material better so that then when we debate it with somebody else, we can say something that makes sense instead of going, what page is that on? Okay. Once you're in a debate of any sort, whether within yourself or with a suitable opponent, rely on the tools you already have in your toolbox, as well as the tools you have learned to work with in this course. These include your abilities to distinguish between things in terms of 3P, 4P, MX, and MI. Okay, 3 possibilities, 4 possibilities, mutually exclusive or mutually inclusive. Yeah, so to understand those, to formulate a valid argument in the Buddhist style, to evaluate the known definitions, divisions, and illustrations of things, and to hypothesize with regard to those that you do not know, to consider the implications of positions, to formulate fair consequences that support these positions or call them into question, and to give appropriate answers to arguments that are presented to you. So, that what he's trying to say in that sentence, which is the size of a paragraph, is try and understand 3P, 4P, MX, and MI well, and then use that when you debate with somebody. Because your knowledge of that will help you in a debate. Okay, so especially when you go to look at the pervasion of a syllogism, that's talking very much about, how does the reason relate to the predicate? Is it 3P, 4P, MX, MI? If it's 4P, it's not going to work. If it's MX, it's not going to work. If it's 3P in the right way, or if it's MI, then the reason's going to work. Okay? So to really, we've been dealing a lot with that format. And it's very helpful when we're thinking about things. All of these tools can be brought to bear in the main strategic approach laid out in this chapter, which is to try to understand what people are saying in terms of how the things they are talking about compare as 3P, 4P, and so on, and then to reason together to confirm that assessment or to address any issues with what they are saying through using your tools. Okay, so the rest of this chapter is going to go into how to use 3P, 4P, and so on when you're debating. Okay, how to use that as a strategy to evaluate someone's argument or to make your own argument. Okay, so I was thinking about this, and it's coming up now in the political situation. Okay, so because much of a debate is concerned with the relationships between two different things, and 3P, 4P, and so on. Okay, so for example, what are the possibilities between crime and an impeachable offense? Yeah, what are they? How many possibilities do you think there are between a crime and an impeachable offense? 4P. Okay, so
Something that is both would be high treason.
mhm. Okay.
Something that is a crime but not an impeachable offense would be jaywalking.
Is jaywalking a crime?
Well, you can get a ticket for it.
It's a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor is same as a crime.
Yeah.
Misdemeanor is a crime, but actually it says impeachable.
Offense.
Impeachable offenses include misdemeanors, but I don't think it includes jaywalking.
Okay.
Something that is an impeachable offense, but not a crime, is actually being mentally incapable of upholding the office,
Mhm.
and something that is neither is resigning of your own accord.
Good. Okay. So you see, this is a topic, but a lot of what people are arguing about, So what exactly is an impeachable offense? And if he shoots somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue, is that a crime? Bill de Blasio said, if someone shoots someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue, they will arrest him. Trump's lawyer said, no, that's not a crime for the president. You can't arrest the president for crimes.
You can't investigate the president. It's not an arrest. You can't investigate it.
Really? He said that? You can't investigate?
Yeah. You can't take the gun away. You cannot investigate if it's a crime. That's what he said.
I see.
It's frightening of arrest.
It's right. It's very.
That makes me really scared.
Yeah, that's quite scary. But you see, this is exactly, can a president be investigated for a crime? And this is a very hot topic,
Did they win their case?
Huh?
Did they win their case? Is that accepted?
No, it hasn't. The courts haven't decided. Yeah, the courts haven't. It'll go to the courts for sure. Yeah?
Kathy Elton says jaywalking is an infraction, not a crime.
Okay. So it's an infraction, not a crime. Give another example.
Shoplifting,
Okay. So shoplifting is a crime,
and they're not going to impeach a president
but
for
you won't
shoplifting.
impeach somebody for shoplifting.
Shoplifting Rolls Royce.
That's not shoplifting, that's grand auto theft.
Yeah.
Okay.
Using your foundation funds improperly, which is against the law.
Uh-huh.
Crime, but it doesn't impeach you. It just close down your foundation.
Yeah,
That's what happened to Trump.
right. That's what happened to Trump. Yeah, misusing your foundation funds.
Did I read that abuse of power is not a crime?
No, but it is an impeachable offense.
How is it not? Yeah.
Abuse of power?
How is that even-
Yeah.
What does abuse of power mean?
Yeah. Well, this is, you know, another thing. If somebody pressures somebody in a political thing, it isn't necessarily a crime. I mean, like Trump is pressuring all the Republicans to follow him. Yeah, kind of, or else. So that is, you know, and we could call that an abuse of power, or somebody else may not call it abuse of power. They may call it
Leadership is.
leadership, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then what, you know, what's the relationship between leadership and abuse of power?
Definition of abuse of power, and I just looked it up, and of
Uh-huh.
course it's only what Wikipedia says, but they says abuse of power, and then they refine it in the form of malfeasance in office or official misconduct is the commission of an unlawful act done in an official capacity which affects the performance of official duties. It can also mean a person using the power they have for their own personal gain.
Yeah,
So that means that would be the example of, so it's not always an unlawful act.
right. But it could be using one's power for the advancement of one's own personal gain.
Mm.
So that's an example of what you were asking, something that's an abuse of power, but not a crime. I'm sorry, what did you say?
Holding a G7 conference.
Oh, yeah, like holding the G7. Actually, although that falls in the emoluments clause in the Constitution,
That probably is illegal.
yeah. So that would make it illegal. But then people are debating, another thing is, you know, is what is restricted in the emoluments clause and holding, you know, an event at your own property. What are the possibilities between those? This is what a lot of the conversation is about. Okay. So, you know, this is what people are debating. So how many, you know, if we look at that, what's forbidden by the emoluments clause and in the Constitution and holding an event at your own property? So how many P do you think there are between those before you P? Yeah, look up the emolument clause. Okay.
This is from Chairman E.J. Cummings, who said this. He says, it's the clause of the U.S. Constitution which prohibits the president from obtaining any benefit of any kind from foreign governments or affiliated entities without the consent of Congress. Potential emollient clause violations could include foreign government officials who buy up entire floors of hotel rooms, pay high rents at your property, lower interest rates on loans, speed up permits for development projects, or take all kinds of other inappropriate actions to ingratiate themselves with you.
Now, it's interesting. I bet you some people would debate if that is actually the definition.
It says potential violations. The Constitution is just that short one that says obtaining any benefit from any kind of foreign government or affiliated entities without the consent of Congress. That's the definition.
That's the actual words in the Constitution.
Right.
Oh, okay, that's pretty clear, isn't it? Because when it says of any kind. Yeah. Okay. So then what was our thing that we were, you see how debate works? We're off on a new topic that we have to figure out so we can come back to the initial one. So how many P are there between a transgression of the emolument clause and holding an event, an international event at your own property? 4P, okay. Explain.
Something that's both is President Trump wanting to host or hosting, let's say hosting G7 conference at one of his hotels.
Mhm.
Something that is a transgression of the emolument clause would be maybe taking a bribe from a foreign government? But
Well-
what's that?
What was her,
But not holding an international event.
what?
At your
Yeah, but
property.
it's not holding an
Yes.
event. Yeah.
Yes,
So it's taking a bribe from a foreign government. Yeah.
right. And holding an international event at your property that's not a transgression of the emolument clause would be, who else has a hotel?
What he did before, holding the Miss Universe conference, contest at
the
his
Trump
hotel.
Okay, I'll keep it with Trump. And something that's neither, could be anything other than that. Having a potluck at your house.
Yeah.
Yeah, having a potluck for sharing the Dharma Day at the Abbey.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. This is exactly what is going on. And people are trying to figure out what are the definitions, what are the possibilities, what are the illustrations that are illustrations of those definiendums and definitions. This is exactly what's happening. Yeah. So you can really see how pertinent it is. Yeah. Okay, so this brings up, what is the definition of crime? Okay, and what is the definition of an impeachable offense? So we have to learn the definitions of those, And then what are the possibilities between eliciting the help of a foreign power for one's own political advantage and impeachable offense? According to Mick Mulvaney, they're mutually inclusive. No, he'd probably say there's 3P, or I don't know. If you're Mick Mulvaney, yeah, what would you say? What are the possibilities between eliciting the help of a foreign power for your own political advantage and impeachable offense? Mutually exclusive? Doesn't it depend on who does it? If a Democrat did it, would they be mutually exclusive? Yeah, probably not. Yeah. So we would have to think, if a Democrat we respected did it, would we say that it's an impeachable offense? Or would we just kind of, because we like that person and their policies, say, look, it happens all the time. It's not a big deal. Get over it. The president's doing so many good things for the country. Would we say that if somebody we supported politically? Yeah. Huh? Yeah. Okay, explain.
Today I heard today on the NPR, I heard two NPR commentator and another commentator who is questioning, talk about Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And before they have the conversation, they say that we have to disclose that Facebook is a supporter of NPR, because they have to say that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have their conversation. And and it was about them getting too big and all these kind of things, the issues that are current right now, because they just were talking to the CEO of Facebook, the Congress was. They were discussing that. But what I noticed about the conversation was it reminded me of the conversations I hear on Fox News.
Mm.
The way the questions were asked, the word choices that they used, the answers that they made, the things they discussed, it was just like amazing to me.
You dance around.
It was like,
Yeah.
no, it's like you can spin things however you want. You can choose the questions you ask. You can choose, like what we learned in NVC, the kind of language that you use. You can use these small little words that are kind of descriptors, but they show some kind of importance. You know, you can be very polite when you do it, but you can have you already have a spin on it while in the course of asking the questions. Who you invite, even the person they invited, I realized was in a way not completely unbiased, because it sounded like they were actually working for Facebook. It was a professor who was working for Facebook, advising them on something. So, you know, if they wanted to look at this in another way, they could have asked someone who was completely unrelated. And they could have used different words in their questioning and asked different questions. I was kind of surprised.
Yeah.
It wasn't like blatant, but it was like it was all there. It was the same thing.
And so this can happen when we debate too. We spin things, you know, when the topic isn't, you know, politics, but it could be, we could be talking about, you know, emptiness or something, and how we spin things, how we ask the question. Because I know sometimes in the monasteries, when they do their final debates, when they're, you know, and for the Geshe-la Rampa, at some point they can debate just their own views, and at some points they have to debate from the Yikcha, the manual of their own monastery, whether they agree with that or not. And that is considered a skill to develop, to be able to debate something, even if you don't exactly believe it. Yeah, not because you want to trip somebody else up. Yeah, but I think if you do that, it really makes you question things in a much deeper way. But that's the same thing you're talking about. You put a spin on it because you have to support the view of your own monastery. So these things are quite applicable. Yeah.
Kind of along the lines of what Daniel Perdue is saying here, about finding a opponent who wants to debate in good faith. It seems like so much of what goes on in politics is not about trying to get at the truth, but trying to have your what you want to be accepted as the truth.
Right.
Even if you know that it's not a proper
Right.
interpretation of a clause.
Right. So you don't really have a good debate partner to start with. I wonder if the Constitution is assuming that you have a good debate partner. But I would think that the founding fathers, you know, knew that not everybody was so sincere in their political aims. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and so this other question I had, what is the relationship between overlooking what you consider a small negativity because you think the person does a lot of good and holding a moral line? Yeah, that's a good example. Okay. Okay. So do how many P's are there here? One option is overlooking what you consider a small negativity because you think the person does a lot of good. That option, and holding a moral line. So what are, how many P do you think there are? Or I should say, what is the relationship between those? 4P? Okay. Okay, go through and give examples. Okay, so let's remember, one side is overlooking what you consider a small negativity because you think the person does a lot of good. So this could be in many in a lot of the Buddhist scandals too. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the other side is holding a moral line. So yeah, so go through the relationship.
Okay, so you just given an example of both. Is that what were you talking about just in the scandals? Was that something that's one but not two? Something overlooking what you think is a small negativity because you think the person's doing a lot of good, like the moral
And then holding a moral line.
Yeah.
Is there something that's both of those? No, but holding a moral line
At the same time.
at the same time. Yeah. Can you do those two at the same time?
What about presidents who send our troops to war out of some kind of ethical or some larger ideal in supporting democracy? But at the same time, they're sending people to war. They're holding a moral line, like maybe they're trying to put off communism. But
Is that holding a moral line?
well, if you're trying to protect the larger good of various people, it could be seen that way.
Results in killing.
Yeah, results in killing.
It results in killing, but it may also result in greater stability for a region in the long term, or I mean, there might be many.
Yeah, so then you see, before we can even do this thing, we have to ask ourselves, what's the relationship between what and what?
Define a moral line, and how do you define a moral line?
Yeah, how do you define a moral line?
Does that mean no negativity at all?
Yeah, well, how are we going to define a moral line? Put your hand down. Yeah. How are we going to define a moral line?
Just on the surface, it could be either on a religious morality or it could be a non-religious morality. And then, of course, if you choose a religious morality, you might have to even go further, specify further which specific religious morality you're going to be utilizing as the standard. But again, also, if you choose a non-religious morality, you might have to go a little further, more specific that you might have to specify which culture non-religious moral you have to.
Or yeah. So even getting a definition of what a moral line is difficult, isn't it?
Unfortunately, the reality is that the field of ethics looks less like neatly stacked boxes and more like oozing, overlapping puddles.
But the way this question is worded, it looks to me like how do the two compare? Overlooking a small negativity of a person you admire because a person does a lot of good, and holding a moral line is me. I'm the one. What is my moral line, and what does it mean to me if I overlook a quote small negativity?
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be so global. I think it can be looked at very personally.
Yeah. Okay. So then we have to really do this, we have to state what the perspective is. Is it global for everybody? Is it for the individual? And then what we're seeing is that Venerable Sepal will come to one conclusion about the relationship between these two, and Venerable Nima will come to another conclusion.
How can you debate something that you're looking at from a very individual perspective? Because the whole point of debate is that you're holding to the same definitions, the same terms, so that you can arrive at a conclusion. Otherwise, you never arrive at a conclusion. Everybody would have a different definition.
Yeah. So this is why there's such a mess in society, because, for example, on this question, individuals are going to come up with different answers to it. Yeah, according to their own moral, where they choose to, draw the moral line, or how they choose to define a moral line. And people are going to come up with different answers. And then, of course, when somebody disagrees with your answer, then you may say, but a moral line is da 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 da, and they say, no, that's not the definition of a moral line. It's d d d d d, and so then your debate has to go off in that direction. I mean, this is an excellent example of what he's been talking about. How when you debate something, sometimes you have to stop and go way off here and settle this, or are you going to settle it by coming up with a moral line that the two of you agree with? Or are you just going to say, we have different sides and that's it?
Could you give consequences to the person's moral stance?
Okay.
You have to define it and maybe
Yeah.
come to something?
Right. So, yeah.
Thinking, how would the two ever get to a common definition? And maybe they wouldn't, but maybe you could use consequences of one person's proposed definition and maybe come to a place where you might be able to get to a common ground, because you
Yeah.
actually have to have a common subject, right?
Yeah, you would have to have a common definition.
Definition.
But even if you couldn't get to a common definition, it helps people clarify their ideas, because we saw that going on already. Venerable Sepal stated her reasons, but they're doing so much good, and so, with the thing of, fighting a war to overcome communism or authoritarianism or something. So they're doing something really good in the long term, so it's a moral thing. And then people over here saying, but it involves killing. So if it involves killing, how can it be a moral thing? And then somebody else, so people are going to have different, just the fact of debating that is going to get people to think, where do they individually draw the line? Yeah. And so for some people, yes, they're willing to sacrifice life in order to protect democracy or something. And then other people are going to say, no, for me, that's crossing the moral line. But just the process of discussing it helps people to clarify their minds. We're not doing it?
No, just right now, the political climate is we're not doing that.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. But when we talk with each other, we can do that. Yeah. Yes.
Story of the ship captain who killed one person to save
Mm-hmm.
500 others came to mind.
Yeah.
And I've heard that debated back and forth, like he took a hell realm rebirth, but he bounced out. No, he didn't take a hell realm rebirth at all because the motivation was so beneficial or so.
In the scriptural source, I put this in one of the volumes. I forget. It's in it, but in the sutra, it's a bodhisattva. Yeah. It's not an ordinary person, it's a bodhisattva.
Someone online gave as an example of holding the moral line, what is for the greater good? And this is used all the time.
Yeah.
In policies,
and what is
politics.
The greater good?
Yeah. And I think that could also be considered overlooking a small negativity because it's in the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's holding a moral line because it's in the greater good.
Yeah.
So you can have a lot of confused thinking there when you start to use that argument.
But then somebody else could say, well, it's for the greater good temporarily, but it's not for the greater good in the long term because it'll enable other people to kill because they see that there's a justified reason for killing. Yeah. So the greater good is difficult. It's difficult because there's the short term, the long term. Okay, Venerable, give the mic to Venerable Losung. Oh. Okay.
I was thinking about overlooking a minor fault would have to be pretty minor from my point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about like voting for Bill Clinton when he had probably lied about whether he smoked pot or not. It's pretty minor in my opinion. Back then, I might even have thought that great, he probably did smoke pot. Maybe he's not like one of these old guys, but holding the moral line was to remove old man Bush from office because of the harm I thought he was doing. So I was able to overlook that Clinton might not be telling the truth, might not be the most honest person, but was hopefully going to do a lot better good in office.
Yeah. And then other people would come to the exact opposite conclusion.
Yeah, well, the two things being compared, the one overlooking something that you think is minor is already very dubious because two people are going to think they're different.
Yeah, what people think is minor. Yep.
As Venerable Losang just said, because it's so subjective, even the subject would make a difference in what we considered a small negativity. You know, if you're for politician A, then they smoke pot as a small negativity, then you'll overlook that. But if you're against politician B and you already don't like them, and they smoke pot, well, it's just another in a string of things they do badly.
Yeah, confirmation bias. Yep.
It also has to do with time period because smoking pot 20 years ago might have been a big thing. Today, pot is legal in many states. So there you have it. Or how are you going to?
Right. Yeah. And I think where we also run into trouble is when we look at different cultures' ways of doing things. Yeah. And what makes perfect sense and is acceptable in one culture, but is totally abhorrent in another culture. And yet, is this moral or immoral? Is it, So something like, female circumcision or even male circumcision. In some religions, it's, this isn't a religious thing. This is a cultural thing for women. But for men, it's a religious one. Yeah. So then is it, a moral value that is something good, or is it something damaging because you weren't born up in that religion, you didn't grow up in that religion, and you don't see it as something harmful. You see it as something helpful. Okay. Yeah.
I have a cultural related example too. So the Lee Kuan Yew, the prime minister, the first prime minister, was he? No, I don't know. Anyway, extremely important statesman in Singapore. Also does things like cut off the circulation of international papers if they criticize him. But this is irrelevant to a country that doesn't really value freedom of speech, right? He's doing a tremendous amount of good for the country.
Yeah.
So things like that are
Yeah, people shrugged, they didn't care. Yeah, because their value was whether their rice bowl was full, not whether they had free speech. Yeah, and even I was reading something today about, what was it? Oh, I can't remember now, but what somebody considers the free speech, and then other people saying, no, that isn't. Yeah. So you see, how when we're talking about, legal things or cultural things or political things or economic things, and you're trying to make arguments, it's very difficult to, really make a waterproof argument that everybody should accept if they were reasonable. But even in religion, people will debate. Even in Buddhism, you'll have people, Chitta Madhyans and Madhyamakas debate, and at the end they just won't agree, because there's good reasons for this and there's good reasons for that.
When I was in Salt Lake recently, I went to court with Kathy in the morning to watch this, just to see how the process worked. And there was a couple who had already been divorced who were back arguing over the terms of some of the divorce. And the commissioner was guiding the woman had all these testamental, the texts to prove that he had been using negative speech and, breaking their agreement. And they were full of profanity. And the commissioner called him on that, and he said, yes, this is, I can't remember the technical term, but this is abusive speech or negative speech. And the guy sitting there going, like, really? Was so surprised that using profanity would be perceived in a court of law to be him breaking that thing about not using abusive speech against his spouse. So even there, I mean, he got nailed on it, but even there, the understanding was important.
Yeah. But we got the point, huh? Yeah, we got the point. Let me see if I had another question. No, yeah. Okay, implications about the comparisons of phenomena are always in play in a discussion of pervasions because you have to be speaking about two things in order to form a statement of pervasion. And pervasions are part of every syllogism and consequence. Also, this framework for making comparisons can quickly be brought into play for a discussion on the qualities of things. Yeah. And so, when you're debating, like in the discussion about all colors are red, even though they're trying to say the color of a white conch is red, even that's something about a quality. And it's looking at whether the reason applies to the subject. Still, the thing is dependent on pervasion to prove. Yeah. So this whole framework of the different relationships is quite important. Okay, of course, analysis of the comparisons of phenomena is not the whole of Buddhist reasoning and debate by a long shot, but it is probably the main procedural framework, and it provides a format in which you can use all of your skills. Okay, so that's why the rest of this chapter is really going to focus on that. With practice, when listening to a discussion, you can come to see the bubbles just floating by. So this is in reference to the Euler diagrams used to demonstrate the different comparisons of phenomena. So the ones with the circles. I remember calling them Venn diagrams. Yeah, so he has a different term. Okay, so I am reminded of the story I once heard of a mathematician who saw the two sides of an equation in colors. And if I remember correctly, if the colors weren't the same, then he knew there was a problem with the equation. Listen, and this is the applicability part. Listen to natural discourse. Pay attention to what you are reading. Track the arguments that you are hearing, and you will begin to notice the rampant abundance of bad thinking out there. Or in here. Okay. In terms of the layout of these strategies, there are four main categories: 3P, 4P, MX, and MI. Within each of these are four cases for each, which correspond to 3P, 4P, MX, and MI. So here, this is what he's explaining. It's very hard to understand from the explanation. Let me read it and then I'll explain it, okay? The first cases are those in which you tend to agree with the person, and the strategy concerns how you may reason together to sort out whether or not you are right. The next three cases in each category are the cases in which the person seems to be speaking of two things, as if they were compared in some way other than what you think is the case. The prevailing strategy for these cases of apparent disagreement is to go directly to the problem. Okay, so what he's talking about here is there's four different situations. You're talking with somebody, you're debating with somebody about something, and they think this thing is 3p, or they think it's 4p, or they think the relationship between these two things is mx, or they think the relationship is mi. Okay? So you have four things of what the other person is thinking that the relationship between the two points are. Okay? But what about what you think, or how you think those 2 points are related? So if you start with 3p, the other person may think these 2 points are related as 3p, okay? But you think they're related as 4p. Or wait a minute, they think they're related as 3p. You agree with them, that's one option. Yes, they're 3p. Or they think they're 3p, you think they're 4p. Or they think they're 3p, you think they're mutually exclusive. Or they think it's 3p, and you think they're mutually inclusive. So for each of the things that they think, there are 4 options for how you think. Okay? Yeah. So what he's going to go into now is, and he's giving the order differently of 3p, 4p, mx, and mi. Okay? And he's giving or laying out a structure of, okay, if your opponent thinks 3p and you think they're also 3p, how do you reason together to confirm that? If they think they're 3p, you think they're 4p, how do you debate with them to show them that there's something that they're not considering? If they think it's 3p and you think that they're mx, then you have to, how do you debate with that person to show them that they think something exists that you don't? Yeah. And if they think that these two things are 3p, but you think they're mutually inclusive, yeah, then you have to show them again that they're thinking something exists that you don't agree with. So how to debate in all these different, that was the example of if your opponent thinks 3p, then if they think 4p, then again, there's those 4 possibilities. You agree, yes, they're 4p, or you think they're 3p, you think they're mx, you think they're mi. Okay? So a lot of the debate is structured around trying to figure out how the other person is seeing the relationship between these two things, first of all. And then what do you think the relationship between the two things is? And then if you agree, how to reason together to validate what you think. But if you don't agree, how to put forth a consequence or whatever to help the person expand their mind and see how the relationship between these things actually is. Okay, so that's what is going to happen in the rest of the chapter. Okay, is this paragraph, when he said this, it was like, huh? But then if you read on, then you realize what he's talking about. Okay? Sometimes, for the life of you, you just can't make out what a person intends to say and how it might relate to the different comparisons of phenomena. Yeah? That happens sometimes, doesn't it? You're talking to somebody and it's like, huh? What are they talking about? I'm not getting it. They're putting something together and I am just not getting what they're saying. Oh, yeah. Good example. Yeah. when we were studying Nyingma, okay, some of us anyway, are going, huh? We don't get it. Okay. So the advice is, if you're talking with somebody and you don't understand what in the world they're saying, that doesn't mean they don't have a proper argument. It means you're not understanding it. Or it could be they don't have a proper argument, either one of them. But you're trying to figure out what in the world they're saying, okay? So if before you can have a debate, you have to figure that out. If you can't figure out what they're saying, then you can't debate it, okay? So at those times, when that happens, just ask questions and try to understand and clarify. So don't even try and debate if you don't understand what the person's getting at. It's like when you're giving a Dharma talk, and somebody asks a question and you don't have the foggiest idea what their question is about. Has that ever happened to you? Yeah, and you're up there in front of the room and they're asking you a question and you're going, what is this question about? So before you can answer it, you have to ask them questions. Are you saying this? Are you meaning this? Do you think that these two things go together? You have to ask questions before, in a Dharma talk, you can respond to their question, or in a debate, you can even begin a debate. Okay, so you ask questions and try and understand and clarify. So make sure you do that. Don't try and answer a question that you don't understand. A question that isn't clear. Don't even try. Don't humiliate the other person and make them look dumb. Don't make excuses for why you can't answer it. Just ask them questions and try and understand. Sometimes that alone will shake a person off of a wrong understanding. Then, once you've been able to ferret out what that person is suggesting in terms of the comparisons, the following guidelines and strategies are intended to help you sort it out and get it straight. So going through these comparisons and cases one by one, what are helpful strategies for analyzing the person's position? Okay, so what he's going to do now is give examples of these 16 possibilities. Okay. So first he says, note well, in the illustrations for these strategies, and one with a circle is used to represent a real example in the comparison. However, sometimes a person seems to imagine that something exists when you believe that there is no such thing. Such an imaginary example is represented by a question mark in a circle. Now, if in the following paragraph, he's left out some things. They didn't do a good job proofreading this, okay? So these two symbols, one with a circle for something that you believe exists, and question mark with a circle, which is not in there, whoever proofread. It's in the book? Oh, it's not in the... Yeah, it's not in the electronic version. In the previous paragraph, they have the question mark with the circle, but at that point in that paragraph, it's not there in the Kindle version. Okay, and a question mark for something that you believe does not exist. So these two signs indicate the two main scenarios that emerge from analyzing what someone is thinking in terms of the comparison of phenomena. Okay, so the first scenario is that the person is not aware that there is something that qualifies as something else, but that he didn't think of, and so he excluded it. So You know, you're trying to prove that something is 4p, but the other person thinks it's 3p because they don't see. They see that there's something that's p but not q, but they don't see that there's something that's q but not p. Okay, so for that, when you draw the diagram, you put the one with the circle in the part where that they're missing. Okay, so for this scenario, okay, well, he said the first scenario is the person is not aware that there is something that qualifies but was excluded. Okay, like perhaps that there is an, how do you say it? Arachnid that is not a spider. Okay. So maybe somebody says, okay, you know, the pervasion between arachnids and spiders is that they're mutually inclusive. Yeah. And then you say, oh, no, that's not true, because there is something that is an arachnid, but not a spider. For example, a tick. Is a wasp an arachnid? I don't think so. Yeah. Okay, so that would be an example of that. They're not seeing that there's something that actually fits in. Yeah. So that's the first thing to see. The other main scenario is that the person imagines that there is at least one example of a thing that qualifies in a way that does not seem to accord with reality. Okay, like believing that there could be a spider that is not an arachnid. Okay, so the person is thinking, oh, there's something, you know, oh, yeah, there's 4p, because there is something that is a spider but not is an arachnid. And so for this scenario, the question mark is placed inside the diagram where the person seems to believe it would exist. But because you have a question mark there, it's showing that it doesn't really, there's nothing there. Yeah. Whereas if you put a 1 with a circle, the person isn't seeing that there is an example of that, and you're putting that 1 in the place in the diagram to point that out to the person. Okay? In this case, the prevailing strategy is to ask the person to give an example of such a thing. Okay, so the for the first scenario, yeah, where there's a 1, the prevailing strategy is to try and make the person aware that there is such a thing. Okay, so you would give an example and then try and, you know, they might refute that example, but you would refute their disagreements until they came to see, yes, there is an example that fits that. Okay, so in the first one, the strategy is to make the person see that there is such a thing. In the second one, the strategy is to you want to show the person that there isn't such a thing. So the way you do that is to ask them to make an example. Yeah, give me an example of something that's a spider but not an arachnid. And the person goes, a wasp. And then you say, Then you say, you know, give the reason why a wasp is an arachnid. Oh, yeah, why a wasp is an arachnid. And then the person has to quote the definition for an arachnid and then show why a wasp fits that definition. And when they can't do it, then that your strategy has been successful. Okay, you've asked them to give an example and prove that example, and they can't. Okay. So note well In all the sections of this book in which I have discussed the comparison of phenomena, I have followed the predominant Tibetan way of ordering these: 3P, 4P, MX, and MI. Here I continue that, but the order may seem confused because in each section, a different one is taken to the top. It might be helpful to have an outline of the arrangement of cases first. Okay, so the number one is, the other person thinks that it's 3P and you agree. Okay, then still under number one, the second option is they think it's 3P, but there's actually 4P. That's what you think. Or the third option is they think it's 3P, but those two things are actually MX. And the fourth option is they think it's 3P, but they're actually MI. Okay, are you with me? Yeah. Okay. So first you listen and you figure out, that person thinks these two things are 3P. Then what do I think? Do I agree with that? Or do I think they're 4P, MX, or MI? And then according to what you believe, then you're going to have a different strategy in the debate. You'll respond to what they say in a different way. Okay, so we're going to stop here so that next week we'll go back and review that, but at least it's introducing that. So take it home, go through it, If you read ahead, it'll really help you when it comes to class. Is that helping you understand what's going on in the world a little bit more? Yeah. And how so much of what happens is we're trying to put things in categories and figure out what the label for them is and what the definition for that label is, and what the illustrations of the objects for that definiendum and definition. And it gets pretty complex.
That's why Einstein said that it would be really good to have a world united nation where the nations have common agreements.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Yeah.
Can I go on record as saying I wasn't advocating war?
Oh.
It was just an example that sprung to my mind.
Okay.
Thank you.